We are on the morning break in the questioning of Emily Apple at the Undercover Policing Inquiry. I'm joined by Zoe Young from Campaign Opposing Police Surveillance. This morning we've gone through sort of how the background to, as is the case often with civilian witnesses, how Emily Apple ended up, as well as Don Ramble put it, being in the place she is today, sat at the stand, her like political background. We then got into the fact that she's been arrested 76 times. But she points out the vast majority of these are bullshit arrests. She had very, very few convictions. She's never been convicted of any violent crime, of any public order. She talks about her commitment to direct action. We went through a bunch of the reporting on her. I mean, first, very briefly, looking at HN77, Jackie Anderson, and HN14, Jim Boyling. Both of which she doesn't remember as people, but did report on her. She was reported on by a great number of undercover officers. And then we got into the beginning of what I feel is the majority of the reporting of the day, which was by HN3, cover named Jason Bishop, who we heard from a couple of weeks ago at the inquiry. There was quite a bit there. We spent a lot of time looking at the Fairford Air Show. And the protest outside the Gala Hotel, the Farnborough Air Show, and the outside the Gala dinner at the Grosvenor Hotel, which resulted in her first arrest since she had returned to protesting after having a baby. I mean, what was particularly interesting about it is that Jason Bishop was a witness to the arrest, and he was called to be a witness at the hearing, and that we saw the documentation from the SDS. Asking for solicitors' advice about what to do in this situation, and it referred to her defence as being fabricated, which, you know, there's no suggestion in any other sense apart from within this report by Mike Dell asking for solicitors' advice about the fabricated nature of it. What did you make of all the things we heard?
Well, I just felt a lot of sympathy really for Emily, because I mean I was a kid who grew up with a strong sense of right and wrong and struggle around unfairness, and I was very much reflecting on the way that Mitting looked at her, especially around these dinners. And I was wondering, you know, is this because of the reporting, or is it because he's like, you know, he's a Catholic, he sort of seems to have his own moral sense. And the way she was talking about these dinners where all these politicians are there with these arms dealers, and she was a new mum, and she brought babies covered, you know, she brought dolls covered in blood, and
fake blood.
Sorry, yes, as part of, they were going to give us an award or something to.
So I mean, the idea was for some sort of street theatre,
Yeah.
and it was clearly very sketchy what the actual plan was to present them. I mean, I remember at the time that they were used quite extensively during that period at Dicey and other places. People would have them strapped to their bicycles, and they were kind of used as props. People had them even on placards and banners. I remember them being. It was a bit of a prop for the kind of. You know, kind of visualizing the reality of what these very swanky dinners actually are about. They're about killing and maiming children.
Exactly, which you know, and the fact that you've got a new mum willing to do that. I think my feeling, I don't know if I'm wrong, but I was wondering if that was kind of getting through to the judge a little bit. To that point, he was really looking at her a lot about that issue.
One of the things,
just casually throwing in the word fabricated, I think that is just so casual. And Mitting seemed keen to say that, oh well, Bishop had claimed it wasn't him. Well, then who was it? Who was? I
mean, more importantly, I mean, it was pointed out that we've got huge numbers of missing reports from Jason Bishop, particularly from this period, and we don't know what else he was saying in his reports. The reports we've seen do not contradict any of the evidence that Emily Apple has given. One thing that was very interesting was that when we compared what was in the reports, which made great stall of the fact that Lord I was going to say Lord Rothermere. It wasn't Lord Rothermere, was it? Lord Robinson. Some fucking nibs was going to appear at this gala dinner, and that it was claimed that the activists were aware of this and they were looking to target him specifically. As Emily pointed out, we have no idea who's going to these arms fair gala dinners, and I mean, it's not really about who the individuals are. We never get to see them because the nature of the security operations that are deployed at these events. There are numerous other entrances. They make a great effort to make sure that dignitaries are not having to witness protests against them. So people are brought in through these other entrances. I mean, often, the cars pull up, in the bay behind a wall. You don't actually see people. It's not really about that. And I mean, and I think this was, just this sort of this way in which, when you look at the reports, it's very personalized. They're going after this dignitary, that dignitary, this, like famous name in politics or business or whatever. And as Emily, I think, really effectively pointed out, that's not how we approach it. It's not about that. It's not about what we know. These individuals are there because we see the speeches afterwards. It's about the power. It's about the influence that. As she pointed out, BAE Systems had more private meetings with government ministers than any other company during this current government. Like more so than any other kind of the witnesses we've heard recently, we're constantly reminded of how current and how, like, right now, so many of these things are.
Seriously,
so many of the companies that were being protested against at these arms trades are directly responsible for the mass murder of people happening right now.
Well, literally, one of the other topics that came up was the buses taking people to protest at RAF Fairford, which is actually a US airbase, which is actually being used at present for American warplanes. And those buses, there was three different actions over a period of months, which Emily was involved in organising the buses, and Bishop was around. They were working together the whole time. He clearly knew that they were organising these buses. Now, I was on one of these buses, and we were kidnapped in Lechlade in Gloucestershire. We were stopped by the police for 2 hours, searched for everything, and then they basically turned the buses round, sent us back to London, threatened the drivers with arrest if they even slowed down. We had helicopters buzzing us. They closed every exit and entrance to the M4. They literally closed the M4 motorway. BBC wouldn't report it. I was at the time selling a lot of footage to the media, and I was ringing them up from the bus saying, I've got this footage of this most surreal incident that is still ongoing. And they were like, oh, that's really interesting. Hang on a minute. Came back on the line. We're not covering that. Goodbye. And then every time afterwards, the media tried to misrepresent it, that we were a bunch of crazed, violent thugs with literally, David Blunkett said we had swords and cudgels at one point. It's like, hang on, this is peace protest. We're going to try and stop destruction, dead babies covered in blood. We are not going to be going with swords and cudgels. And even, anyway, they made all this shit up. But basically, the point being that Jason Bishop was part of the organising group that ran these buses, and another was on one of the buses.
Yeah, significantly, he says that he wasn't there. He wasn't in the country for the third coach, so he didn't know anything about it. And when he gave evidence, he was very clear that, like, Fairford coaches wouldn't know anything about that, wasn't in the country when that happened.
Then
but it was pointed out that this was the third of the Fairford coaches trips that took place, and he was very much involved in the first two. So the idea that he wasn't aware of the third is just a nonsense, and a misrepresentation by him during his evidence. Though not directly lying, it shows that he is being evasive.
And the point about this is that on the second of the trips to Fairford, people actually pulled down the fence. It looked like symbolic. People were tugging on the fence, and suddenly it came down. It was like, shit, whoa. So the police were very well aware, and there was talk. Mark Thomas, a comedian, came up with this info that the police were actually afraid that if we got in again, that the police might start shooting. That the US forces might start shooting, from an occupying force in Britain to start shooting peaceful protesters. That takes you right back to the start of the SDS, the 68, when the anti-Vietnam War protesters were getting close to the US embassy and threatened with being shot, and that's why they set up the SDS.
But in both cases, there is no recorded actual threat of being shot. It's just simply that something that's used by the police as an explanation for why they can be draconian and heavy-handed, because at least you're not being shot with American bullets. And the idea that they've got no real sort of agency in that matter at all otherwise.
Well, maybe this is something that should be looked into. That was this ever real?
It wasn't. That's that's what we can glean, is that that none of the people who've claimed that this was going to happen had any. There's no suggestion of this coming from the US at any point. There's no paper trail. But it's something that the police have been very quick to throw out. They used it around Greenham Common as well. Numerous US air bases. Is the idea that you will be shot if we don't intervene. If we're not heavy-handed and draconian towards you, then the Americans will shoot you.
Well, it's like, we've got a violent occupying force on our land, hiding out in Gloucestershire under the name RAF. But there's so many US air bases in this country, and what's that saying about things?
As you mentioned, one of the other people who was on those Fairford coaches was Rod Richardson, who was a National Public Order Intelligence Unit officer. We will be hearing from him and the National Public Order Intelligence Unit during Tranche 4. The inquiry initially seemed to be treating the Fairford coaches as a Tranche 4 issue. I think it's really important that it has been brought up during Tranche 3, because the SDS were requested for intelligence on it. It was very clear that there was an SDS involvement in that the operation to turn them around.
Yeah, I mean, and specifically what they were requested for information about was how the police handled the ensuing judicial review. So a group of us who were on the buses, like most of us, 120 or something, we took a judicial review, and that whole process took like 10 years, I think, until it completed. And we won it in the end. We got a grand or so compensation, which for amount of work and time put into it. Anyway, the point being that the police seem to have been lying throughout that whole process because they claimed that they had no way of potentially knowing who we were, who was on the buses, etc. But they had one guy from NPOIU on a bus and one guy from STS in the organising group, even if he wasn't there on that day. Although where was he? He wasn't asked. And I think this is one thing really valuable about people who are paying so much attention to this process. Like Emily's become one, you know, now it's come into her era, that you can actually say, so why, you know, that should have been asked of this guy. Why wasn't he there at that day?
It's only a short break, and we are going to go back in fairly soon. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Oh, just tell the world to like, share, send Tom some coffee money, and come down. Seriously, come down. I've come all the way from Cornwall again for this, just because it's only by having multiple brains. You know, you might think you've got nothing to contribute, but the fact is you might have been on that one demo where they're lying about, and you might be the only person who knows that they're lying about it, because you can't expect Tom or Evelyn or Chris or any of the people who are here all the time to know everything. It's not fair. And don't think of yourself as not important. Don't think just because you don't remember this spy cop that they weren't spying on you. You know,
there has been some criticism online about the lack of analysis that is coming out from the people who are covering the inquiry. I would point out we are a very small group, and that we are doing the best we can to cover events, and the fact that we don't get embroiled in in analysis of things as they happen is simply because there's limited kind of capacity to do so. And if you do have those criticisms, then perhaps please consider. You don't have to be in person to take part in following events. I realized there was a restriction order earlier, and when I last looked, it was still in place. The broadcast was still suspended, which is a ridiculous situation. Hopefully it has been, still suspended. Ridiculous, utterly insane. So please do come down, or please just follow from a distance, and maybe do some of the analysis that you think is required of those of us who are following it closely.
Yeah, you can do it. If you think there needs more, do it.
Somebody just said, you all do a great job, and I'm looking forward to telling you that in person tomorrow.
Yay.
Fantastic. Good to
See you then.
Tomorrow. See you then. Cheers for now. We'll see you during the next break.